I promise you, the tactics that I'm about to tell you have been used to great effect by dictators and tyrants and many others because they work. I'm going to talk about these two. The first is going to offend some of you on the right, and the second will offend some of you on the left. I will simply say I'm probably the least partisan person you've ever met, and what you're about to hear is simply my take on the objective reality of things as they are right now, but you'll need to make up your own minds about that. And let's start here, disinformation. Now, this is a word that's bandied about a lot, not always completely clear what it's referring to, so let's define our terms. Disinformation, for today's purpose, manipulates the information environment to deceive, disorient, divide, and ultimately, most importantly, demoralize. How can you tell if you're in an environment that's been corroded or corrupted by disinformation? Well, here are the sorts of things that disinformation operatives will look for. They try to create cynicism. There's no real news sources anymore. I don't trust anything. They try to deceive. We don't know the outcome of the 2020 election. That's said by a US Senate candidate in April of 2021. It's not true. She's been deceived. And demoralization. This is a voter who says, I guess I would have to say that I'm completely confused as to who is lying and who is telling the truth. I just feel helpless. Now, I want to focus on demoralization for a minute, because although the disinformation operative would like to deceive, disorient, and divide, if they can't do any of those things, they'll very happily settle for demoralization, because people who are demoralized don't act. And that opens the door for other people who are ready to act. Don't take my word for it. This is Yuri Bezmenov, senior KGB defector. This is a famous interview that he gave explaining the techniques of Russian disinformation operatives. The Russians are the best in the world of this. They've been doing it over 100 years. They are really, really good. Now listen to him for a minute as he explains how this works.
But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. Exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures.
Facts mean nothing to him, even if I shower him with authentic truth. That's the state that they're trying to induce. Here's an example, one of many. There are more current examples involving Ukraine, but this is a nice clean one. This man is Sergei Skripal with his daughter. He was poisoned by by Russian operatives using Novichok, a Soviet-era nerve agent. The Russians had an explanation for this. In fact, they had a lot of explanations. Here are only some of them. Britain poisoned them, Ukraine poisoned them, accident, suicide, and so forth. Notice, there's no effort here to make these multiple explanations cohere. They're just throwing everything out there through every possible channel at maximum volume in order to confuse and disorient and make people think, I don't know, I'll never know, we can't tell what's true and what's false. They're leveling the epistemic playing field so that truth no longer seems to matter. They fling up swarms of falsehoods, concocted theories, and red herrings intended not so much to persuade people as to bewilder them. A very powerful tactic. If someone tells you disinformation is just someone's bad word for an opinion they don't like, that's wrong. We're talking about some very specific and time-tested techniques here. Who else is using these techniques? This is Stephen Bannon. advisor to President Trump in the 2016 presidential campaign, worked in the White House for the first year. Famous quotation, "The real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit." Now that is a vulgar statement of the case, but it is a very precise and accurate rendition, summary, of what's called a Russian-style fire hose of falsehood mass disinformation campaign. That's where you push out so many lies, half-truths, falsehoods, exaggerations, and conspiracy theories through so many channels simultaneously that people lose their orientation. The fact-checkers in the media can't keep up. Who else does this? 2016 political campaign, this is PolitiFact. They are fact-checkers. They're the first. They've been around a long time. They're pretty good. Hillary Clinton, they find, of what she says during the campaign that's checkable, 26% is at least mostly false. That's too high. We don't like that, but maybe it's consistent with a politician at the height of a campaign. Donald Trump, the comparable figure is 71%, mostly or entirely false. In other words, if the man opened his mouth, chances were he uttered a falsehood. Now, you try going through your day having 71% of the checkable things you say be false. You can't do it. This doesn't by accident. It is not a coincidence that Donald Trump's very first 2 actions in office were to issue a falsehood about the size of his inaugural crowd and a falsehood about whether it rained during his inauguration. Both of these were self-evidently false statements. You could look at the photos and compare the crowds. You could look at the umbrellas and see that it rained. The point wasn't to fool anyone. It's to say, I'm in charge of truth now. I'm going to say what's true today, and it might be different tomorrow. And indeed, we see this is the president altering the course of a hurricane forecast with a Sharpie pen. This is his record in office, over 30,000 false and misleading claims, according to the Washington Post fact checkers. That's an average of about 20 falsehoods a day. We have never seen anything like this in American politics. Now, you can agree with President Trump's policies on abortion, the Abraham Accords, moving the embassy, immigration, China. That's all fine with me, but it's a separate discussion. This is not something that any prior president or politician has ever done. And I want you to look at this area here that I've boxed in. Can you all see that? So you see a rapid increase in the rate of falsehoods, and you see that it's starting in the summer of 2020. Can anyone guess what that's all about? Yeah, I heard it. Louder. I heard it. The election. Of course, it's the election. So April and May of 2020 come, and the president begins to talk about the corruption, the faking of mail-in voting. And we political people at Brookings look at this and say this makes no sense because we're having a pandemic. Older people are vulnerable. They prefer voting by mail. They vote disproportionately Republican. What is he doing? This makes no sense. What we missed was that the president was not targeting the election. He was targeting the day after the election. He knew that he was likely to lose that election, and he was testing out and putting in place the narrative that he would launch on a huge scale the day after the election. He was planting it in the networks of conservative media, Republican politicians, and so forth. And sure enough, the day after the election, he and this network unleashed a tsunami of falsehoods about the election being stolen. Here is the president's Twitter feed on one random day. I search for election. You can see that he starts there from morning to night. He is tweeting. Here's another random day. Just pouring it out. They use every channel. They use mainstream media, conservative media, politicians, word of mouth, social media, you name it. They even use the courts as organs of disinformation. They file dozens of lawsuits claiming that the election was rigged. All of them, except in part one, and that's just a technical decision which had no effect on the vote count. All of them are thrown out by the courts because they're not based in any demonstrable facts. In fact, they're not consistent with each other. It's the Russian thing. Any old thing, they will say as long as they get it into court. Why will they do that? Members of the legal profession have been disbarred because they did this. The answer is they're using courts as an outlet for a Russian-style mass disinformation campaign. They're using it as a communication channel. And the way this works is if you knock down one version of the conspiracy theory, lie, exaggeration, or half-truth, they simply cook up another. The president and his people charged that Maricopa County, that's Phoenix, my home county, was stolen. 2 internal audits, 2 external audits, and then an audit by Senate Republicans, by a group that they commissioned, also all found the same thing. The count was accurate. Joe Biden won Maricopa County. At that point, what did President Trump do? He said, you know what? I guess I was wrong. I lost Maricopa County. No, that's actually, here's what he really said. He just switched counties. He just said it was Pima County. That's Tucson. They're making it up as they go along, but that doesn't matter. The point is, what they're doing is this. They can shake Americans' belief in the very concept that truth exists, that we're capable of discerning the difference, that there is anyone we can trust about anyone. And that puts them in a position to implant this, the lie that the election was stolen. Now, this is the most prominent example today because I believe it's the most dangerous. When a majority of an entire political party believes that we are no longer a democracy, and when nothing you can say or do will convince them that we are a democracy and that our vote count had integrity, we're in very deep trouble as a country. This goes to the heart of our governability, unlike, for example, whether you think the world is flat. But let's not tarry too long here because we have more to discuss. Now, this is a tool that's primarily used by the left for reasons that are simply opportunistic. The right can do canceling and does, and the left can do disinformation and does. But right now, this is done primarily by the left because they have such good access to social tools. Canceling manipulates the social environment to deceive, disorient, divide, and demoralize. Interestingly, the word canceling didn't exist when I started work on that book, but it turns out to be a pretty good word in technical terms for what's going on. How do you know if you're in an environment where this set of tools is being used? Well, you get chilling. These are all from people in academia, which is where this problem is, alas, the most pronounced. Student, on today's college campus, the risks of engaging in debate of controversial topics vastly outweigh the benefits. If you're a student in this room, I bet you've thought this at least once or twice. False consensus. You don't know what's true because you don't know what anyone else thinks is true. Certain points of view about touchy subjects never reach the surface. The result is an echo chamber. And there's that big one again, demoralization. As a professor says, I feel I am constantly tiptoeing through a minefield. I feel there is absolutely nothing I can do as a professor to stop this. It's like trying to hold back the ocean with a broom. That particular professor felt so helpless that he exited academia altogether. And friends, that's what they want. They want you to leave and subside so that they can run things. Now, there is nothing new about canceling, like disinformation. It goes back a long time. Alexis de Tocqueville came to America in the 1830s and declared that the greatest threat to freedom is what today we call canceling. He put it this way: the majority draws a formidable circle around thought. Within these limits, the writer is free. But woe to him if he dares to go beyond them. And then he lists a whole suite of social consequences that will happen to Americans if they get out of line with received opinion. You lose your jobs, lose your friends, no one will hire you, and so forth. I highlighted the word majority here because what we know today that Tocqueville didn't know is this same tactic can be used very effectively by minorities, and in fact by small minorities. This is a typology of American ideologies by More in Common. It's Hidden Tribes Report, a very good report, 2018. And it rates everyone from the left to the right. You can see that the largest group there by far is what they call the exhausted majority. In other words, most of us. And then you've got the two wings. Now, I want you to look over here on the left, progressive activists. These are 8% of the US population. That's about 1 in 12. Yet somehow they seem to be dominating the information environment in elite universities way disproportionately to their actual numbers, and increasingly in newsrooms and corporations such as HR departments and other environments. Yet they don't even speak for the majority of people on the left. How do they do this? It's got to be a pretty good trick. Well, it's sophisticated stuff. So, you all remember this. We already talked about it. You can manipulate people, what people will say, and even to an extent what they perceive, by manipulating what it is they think the people around them think and believe. You create what are called spirals of silence. I don't speak out that the emperor has no clothes because no one else is speaking out. They don't speak out because I don't speak out. Increasingly, it becomes unchallengeable, spoofed consensus. You manipulate what it appears that other people think. We see this happen. We've probably been in meetings like this one. This is from a new book, wonderful book by Russell Moore. I was talking to someone who'd served in the Trump White House who would be in meetings where she would say, this sounds insane and dangerous, but everybody else is just nodding, so I must be the crazy one. Russell goes on to describe the same things in meetings he was in at the Southern Baptist Convention, and I'll wager some of us have been in these meetings where we really questioned our beliefs because no one around us seemed to go with them. Well, how do you do that? Well, if you can create an environment where even a substantial majority is afraid to speak out, you can make it appear that everyone agrees with you, even though most don't. You can silence those who disagree. You can create a false consensus, and suddenly it looks like people who are in fact in the majority are a small and wrong-headed minority. It turns out, unfortunately, social media is a brilliant tool for using this way because it is so easy to gang up on people with hundreds, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of people almost instantly coming down on them if they violate some orthodoxy. You make an example of people. Here's one famous example. This is from 2020. David Shore, who is a left-of-center political analyst, tweets out a perfectly valid tweet summarizing some research on rioting. Violent rioting is counterproductive. Some of the people on the other side don't like this, so they instantly start a campaign against him. They go after his employer. That's on the upper right. Come get your boy. That's addressed to his boss. Shore immediately, very quickly, realizes he's in trouble. He apologizes. I regret sharing this conversation. We'll be much more careful moving forward. Raise your hand if you think that saved his job. Here's another one. This is Emmanuel Cafferty. He is a lineman, a working class guy for San Diego Gas and Electric. It's around the same time frame. He's driving down the street. You see the picture of him. He's cracking his knuckles, or so he says. But someone tweets out that he is using a white supremacist hand gesture at Black Lives Matter activists. This immediately goes online. He is immediately fired, even though the accuser, once apprised of the truth, retracted the charge. Emmanuel Cafferty filed a lawsuit over this. Now, it doesn't take a lot of this to make you super careful about what you say. That means you get an environment like this. 2/3 of Americans self-censored. They're policing their own mind. There's no secret police out there that's going to knock at night and arrest them. They're just worried, what is it that I'll say that might get me in trouble? They're worried about their jobs. This is fresh data. Are you worried about losing your job or missing out on job opportunities? It's about 25% of the public who are afraid of making their political opinions known for fear of losing a job or an opportunity. And notice, apart from liberals who feel a little more secure, this is across ideologies. Very liberal progressives do not feel safer than conservatives. Why would that be? And why would this be? Compare self-censorship rates today with 1954, just past the peak of the McCarthy era. It's about 3 times the level of chilling and self-censorship. Well, that's crazy, right? Actually, wrong. During the McCarthy era, you had a pretty good idea of what not to say to stay out of trouble. Don't be a communist, don't express communist sympathies, and so forth. If you did that, you're probably all right. Modern canceling doesn't work that way. In order to make you neurotic, it never tells you what's safe to say. And in fact, what's safe today is unsafe tomorrow. The rules suddenly change on Twitter. They renorm on you out of the blue. And that's the whole point. They don't want there to be a safe harbor. They want to make you neurotic and afraid that anything you say could get you in trouble, so you become your own neurotic self-policeman. This, of course, is also how totalitarian regimes work. They use prisons instead of social media, but they make you constantly worried that anything you say that displeases someone might get you in trouble, so you had best not say anything at all. Here's a depressing chart, confirmed by a lot of other data. These are college students. This is the percentage who believe their school's climate prevents people from saying things they believe because others might find it offensive. Chilling due to peer pressure and afraid of social consequences. You can see that steadily rose starting in 2016. It's still about 2/3 today. Now that's about the same as the general public. What's heartbreaking about this, universities are supposed to be the safest place in society for robust discussion of controversial viewpoints. That's why you're here. Students, that's why you're paying those fat tuition bills. It's to have those conversations with people you disagree with, to be able to speak your mind and explore and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and help other people learn from those mistakes. That is not the environment on university campuses today. That's an attack, a direct attack on the very heart of the constitution of knowledge.